Ricky. G'day, everybody. Got a really great show for us today. It really is all about our semi-aquatic past and what kind of examples do exist about this. So our closest land-dwelling creature is similar to a whale that's living. What would you imagine that is? Of course, that's similar in science, and it's found, of course, by DNA and this sort of thing. It really is a cetatiodactyl. A cetatiodactyl. So that's a species that's really like a land-dwelling animal with legs that comes to be adapted more in a semi-aquatic existence today as a whale. Okay. So you'd have to look at this, and you can't deny that those are things which have gone on well and truly. And did it happen to all of the species of the cetatiodactyls? No. Not at all. But the ones that went into the semi-aquatic existence certainly did, like the hippo. But only just like for moments of time of its wading sort of thing, whereas whales actually went into the deeper water. Okay. So why not look at the evidence and study physiognomy and somatotyping? Yeah, and this is the topic more in a taxonomy of the logical typing of fact. And so conditions really raised here in our show, in our podcast, really show how semi-aquatic existence certainly explains things way more than anything else does. So no other pattern more clearly has a similar taxonomy and physiognomy than animals that were land-based, yes, and eventually have found themselves in a semi-aquatic environment or more have shifted themselves into a deeper type of a water. So the relationship really of our species isn't unique. It's similar where circumstance is, yes, to land-dwelledness and the upright stance that we have, just the same as other feathered bipedals, but we're featherless bipedals. Okay. So the idea that balance and being in a semi-aquatic existence isn't going to help you be more upright. It sure does. In every species, it straightens the spine. And not only that, but the head comes to be balanced over the top of the spine. And so is somebody going to say that, you know what, something else did that? No, it didn't. Okay? Funny. But water will, and it has. And so there's a structural validity in what we're talking about here today, and also a contextual validity. What I'm talking to you about has face validity, meaning it's got to make sense to you. And I'm not just saying this. I've got plenty of other experts who say the same thing. So there's a validness to it, and also it's reliable. What does that mean? It means it's repeatable. Okay. So we're looking at today, you've got whales, you've got sharks that have been alive since Henry VIII, wandering around in the waters around Greenland, and you've got whales that look like dolphin, and you've got little dolphins that might be only 10 or 12 left in some places, today, and you've got similar changes where a happiness is, where species really can show support. And then you could look at the land-dwelledness and how an animal has gone into a semi-aquatic or aquatic existence. And so where the forces of nature could stimulate things like that, you've got life colloid that live in a mutual lived existence within us. And it's only in a short time that you could see that whales that got left behind in the Sahara Desert after 4,800 BC. In that short time, you could see how whales have evolved. because you could see that they had more legs where that was. So we're looking at a shorter time frame than most people could have thought of, and the evidence really doesn't deny that, you see. You have to fit in the fact. And so a semi-aquatic beginning and places where this is, you could see how that can have, in our species, cause an involuted path. And so that aquatic existence and a mutual lived assistedness where life colloid is, come to adapt and adopt themselves and within ourselves as a conglomerate, giving us various capacity to do things. So you've got in cold water, bone starts to form more, cold water in our inner ear and things like this. And so it does show we've got quite a considerable ability to have been able to adapt ourselves. So molecular observation shows that animals that were land-dwelling and where they had body hair, for instance, and when they went into the water, there were forces in that caused their hair to be lost, because what would be the reason for that, where that was? And they developed a great subcutaneous layer of fat that would form directly under the skin, which it has in our species and only the other species of primate that has a similar condition, basically a little bit, is the proboscis monkey, which also has a semi-aquatic existence in Borneo, in the swamps there. Also, you can find them out to sea, and they gladly will accept a lift, in a boat. Okay. So a lot of points exist that's really like this. And how do you cool ourselves? We've got a really very specific cooling condition, and that only can explain this as a semi-aquatic existence. A savanna existence does not explain that whatsoever. And in somatotyping, meaning like how the environmental forces caused organs to function and be the way they are, and stomachs to be shrunk and de-evolved, like the appendix and what have you. So somatotyping really explains more powerfully that we definitely, no question about it, had a aquatic existence. And so a semi-aquatic existence really is a unique feature, and it's specified sort of relatives that we could look at in a semi-aquatic environment. And certainly you've got the proboscis primate living where the swamps of Borneo are, and no question about it that they have this subcutaneous layer of fat, and they've got a big nose to shed water, the same as we do, whereas the other primates don't have that. Okay. So what's existing there is certain proof, and it really displays a similar mutual lived assistance where a life colloid species could have developed a trunk, and they could be underwater, but they could still be breathing through their trunk above, like a submarine does even. So mutual lived relation, but the nose would form, and it definitely is designed to be able to shed water, okay? And when you go into a water environment, a whole range of things occurs too, olfaction and other things like vision and hearing and things. So our species really gets to come to be where we are, and changes can be explained in our species, a relation to other land dwellers and those that have also had a semi-aquatic existence. And so somatotyping is putting all of us into categories that relate and in a taxonomy of a hierarchical logical typing, basically. So our species really has, some sort of condition of web feet, also, where people are born a little more like that, and some cats are born like that, some dogs also. And they had a certain respect of the observational reference point of being semi-aquatic somewhat, and being able to adapt to some degree like this. So the relation that supports evidence fossil-wise, and also molecular life colloid study, you've got group whales and hippos, of course, and even-toed sort of undulates like the deer and the pig. and single order sort of species called the Certadia cartella. So aquatic ape hypothesis isn't, hypothesis really is just a group of facts that taxonomically looks at how a semi-aquatic existence explains things far more and for our species. And so it's an accepted sort of vast majority that where the scientific community is, because none of this, like what I'm talking about, is anything that's been denied whatsoever, and not a single other story has been put forward that has a proper truth to that whatsoever, but just so missing in lots of pieces and not logical at all. So it's considered way more than just some sort of hypothesis, but scientific fact that's more not any due lack of supported evidence at all, but more of an abundance, in fact, and where the counter evidence is to what we're talking about, where a fossil record is, it's just sort of any other idea isn't explained properly. Doesn't explain this properly. So what's really perfect explains more somatotyping, which is in our species relative to a frugivore, for instance. In our species really is a certain frugivore, not a herbivore, not a grainivore, but a grain is a fruit, right? And a herb, up to a certain degree, we can have some, of course, but our primary condition more is as a frugivore. So most have never studied botany a day in their life and don't even know what the definition of a fruit is, and are unaware that a broccoli is a fruit. So they've got to grow up. But anyway, you're investigating what the somatotyping is, and questions that you could have, and connecting the dots more. So primate really fitting into where our species is and adaptation. You've got hyenas, for instance, and the females have far bigger glands, sexual glands, way bigger than the male's penis. Their clitoris dwarfs the penis. And so the female hyena in that circumstance rules. And do you know what the closest sort of relative might be to a hyena? Most people think the dogs, but cats might, be closer. So you've got certain relatives where the whale is, and you've got this extinct deer that it's closest to. Wow, that's right. You've got whales where a water environment comes to be, and they start to adapt and beautifully lived systems where life colloid is in a pleomorphic condition, adapting and changing the species through aggregation, fusion, and differentiation, and not through mitotic cell division at all. So what's adaptive, where work is, where our own species' uniqueness is, and somatotyping. First, of course, we have a fat layer that can have formed for some people over their eyes. Yeah, that's right. So not everybody has that. Some people might long to have that Chinese look, but you have to have that as, in your gene to be able to get that fat layer over your eyes and more of a gracile look. And so beloved really have adapted in certain, because of climatic kinds of conditions and things like that. And so beauty could be plotted a lot more. Of course, the whale and its beauty, and the dolphin and their ancestors. It's really like the ancient artiodactyl, which is a four-legged, even-toed, sort of hooved, undulated land mammal. So who really has studied ontology and looked into how did our species arise and how does the cell arise? These are the very things that we've addressed in colloidal biology and the secrets of an alkaline body. Might want to get a copy of that. It's a good book. Anyway, the four-leggeds have adapted to running, yes, okay, and cetaceans and they've really got common cetaceous ancestor with our modern day artiodactyls, which is the same species as a cow, or, a pig too, yep, a camel, yes, giraffe, and then also the hippopotamus. So you're looking at DNA study, and whale shows up closest to the hippo. Wow, okay. So DNA testing whales, and they have very common DNA sequence found, and there's only one other animal, today. So let's look at how such sort of really indicates how a non-whale mammal species that's existing alive today and whales' living relative happen to be the hippopotamus. Okay. So not getting off the subject, but like you're looking at mammals that were on the land and shifting back into the sea or having some aquatic existence where this is. And there's 4 types. Basically, you could see what adaptation is, yeah? So you're looking at what the existedness is of somatotyping and how this explains diversity and how mammals really shifted back into the water and the taxonomical grouping, which includes the cetacean, the whale, the dolphin, and the porpoises, all right? So we're keeping in mind you've got pinnipeds, of course. They look a little like dogs, like you've got seals and sea lions and walrus. You've got sirenins like the manatees and dugong and the marine fissipeds, which is really polar bears, and sea otters. So bipedalness, that's like walking around on 2 legs, Penguin and the avian family are walking around on their 2 legs. And you could say evidence could show you, but you can't dismiss what we're talking about, really. What's the claim? Whether you could dismiss these things, you'd only be living where some bias was, where the internet or where someone's thought something is scientific, where it's just completely off the chart, not at all. So science really is standing where the present is, and a construct which we've been talking about, and we're doing what we can to bring some contextual validity into it, and there's no question about it. Plenty of people right throughout history have shown this to be so, and so it's got expert validity. So is it going to be repeatable? Well, plenty of people in the past actually have pointed out the same thing, so it's definite, it's repeatable. What's contextual and construct? It's very deductive and inductive reasoning that a semi-aquatic existence explains various things about our species. So clear fossil evidence that's supporting this and inductive reason that's being pointed out here that of a semi-aquatic phase. And somebody could say that just couldn't have occurred. It's like, how could you say that couldn't have occurred? You have to deny these things, which we're pointing out. And so the summing up of all the primate and what's similar, where change is, and the happiness to our species. So what rarity does it exist, for instance, for our larynx to be lowered so close to where the windpipe is, and that's what's happened to our species in relation to, the other primates. But it's certainly happened to our species. So the voice box has been brought much closer to where wind comes through. So it's streamlining things like that, and even body shape, where the water is, and the ability to control your breath. And these are things which really how do you have some argument that could exist about that? You see, I haven't I haven't had anybody come up and show anything such. I've just had people that I've looked at that could be against what this is we're talking about, and all I've used is nominalizations and unspecified verbs, missing referential indexes, just like word salad. So nobody could say that there's not some lack, of fossil evidence, but deductive and inductive reasonness is certain, and it supports the existence of a semi-aquatic condition, which we've had in time period could be proposed a little bit more. So an alternative explanation that features hairlessness and tries to explain what the adaptation was to that, or the coolingness that we have, where sweat is, and apparent some whole African savanna theory, it's just ridiculous. That's just off the chart wrong. And that could be the only thing that's supported at the moment by science. It's a little bit like, hey, what happened to Galileo? So the subcutaneous layer of fat, which is explained where an energy is to be able to shield yourself and regulate your temperature and also have some fat storage and energy storage, it's a terrestrial condition which is having a semi-aquatic existence that explains what's happened to our species. So inconsistencies otherwise where any hypothesis could have been, it's really that it's something unique really about our trade, yes, and this is really explained ever more by this single factor. Critics could ever note that features like our hands are not well suited to an aquatic environment, and they would be just completely wrong when you look at nature itself, all right? So it's the lack of someone's looking into this and investigating the whole thing to have evidence, which is really from a collectedness of looking at all the literature to become more expert at what could have gone on. So it's certainly it's not unique to our species to have lacked looking at other species and things where we are, people can have not too much had any unified explanation. And then, we're talking about an involuted past, not an evoluted past, which doesn't exist. So alternatives to that, where is it? It's sort of preferred an alternative theory, really, that aligns, got pieces of things which does align with this, and where the fossil record is, you see. So nobody's going to say that there is no way that we never lived or kind of evolved more where wetlands really and coastlands were and are more terrestrial, and that all the succulent types of vegetable that grows along the shorelines and things, and sea vegetable, which explains quite the richness of the very things which get really supportive of our species. So the aquatic conditioning can't be dismissed, you see. It really explains a lot more about the origins of our conditioning, somatotype-wise, and unique traits that we have. And it starts to become, really known in this time after various books become written about the subject. So it's not like any inconsistency has existed. You see, you've got raccoons' hands that look exactly like us, and they can get straight away into the fridge and open up a bottle or something. And they've got the opposing foraging hand where they could just put their hands into water and feel what's going on down there. And they have similar hands as us, like foraging hands. So it's multiple causes where a factor is and not a single factor, okay? So let's just get over that. Everybody get over the idea that something was just singly caused. Things are uncaused. It's more multiple causeness. Okay, so nobody could criticize what that is. It's constant, what we're just talking about. It's noting what the features are, where our hands are, and what's not well suited to foraging, And that's right, the raccoon in a stream. So nobody of any evidence is that I've ever seen comes close more to explaining various things in somatotyping than this insight of an aquatic involuted past. So it's explaining to you here today where this podcast is that there's something that you can't deny, and that's the existence semi-aquatically of our past. Okay. So swimming, of course, where you're swimming, while you're floating, you're in a horizontal position more or less if you're on top of the water, basic, and is your head stretched out anyway? It sure is. Don't tell me that when you lift your chin up, that doesn't lower your vocal cord. It sure does. Primates that didn't have a watery existence actually have to lift their head more to lower their vocal box. So are you a physiologist and have you looked into these things? I think, if you did, then you'd come up with various things like what I'm sharing with you. So mammals, really like the wolf, certainly do talk to each other, whereas domestic dogs just bark. So that's very different. Then the wolves, when they talk to each other, they they lift their heads so that it lowers their vocal cord to have a capacity to be able to talk, and they woof and wuff and woo, and they have these various sounds put together. So it's really ideas which result where you've got some face validity going on here. You've got evidence that's certain, and it's flooding in, and you could see that something contextual certain is being put, and it's certain that other experts agree with what this is, what we're talking about. It's very reliable. The idea that something else exists, it's like, wow, I think it kind of is a bit ridiculous if you're not putting this into the equation. So if you've read the literature, certain great pure conditioning is that's got a construct and context as valid. And in the fossil evidence that supports the things like what we're talking about, it's pointed out, of course, So if we look at this very easily, you could say no fossil evidence exists that shows something else could have been, and that everything that does exist is really just could cover the top of a full billiard table only, basically. Okay, so you're looking at nature from not having any coast, which that's just untrue. We always have lived around the coast. But and what effect would this be, sort of, and behind the multiple cause variables, it's really more a great bell going off, like resonating from the top of your head to your toes. And how could you have a polarized view about this which we're pointing out? And how could somebody have just chucked anything out like this? It's really basic that most people haven't considered this, okay? That's right. So to deny a semi-aquatic existence without even looking into it, it's like, that's right. Too much of that, actually, and that's completely not proper scientific inquiry at all. But it's certain that, no question, when you're looking at this, we've got hands that's similar to a raccoon. Of course we do. And are they scavengers? They sure are. And they can certainly manipulate stones and things. And they can, like I said, open up the fridge and, unscrew a jar, take a sip. So they have this opposing thumb, and so we, coming ever more forward, kind of has a lot more of some semi-aquaticness relative, comes to have a more straight spine than the rest of the primate, and our feet show us a more somatotypedness that explain things, and certain like our understanding of using of tools and various things in nature, and to build things, and the practice of that, and opposing some gives you like a bigger somatic area in your brain. So a semi-aquatic existence where otters are, and certainly our species of women, our hands all have a pretty parallel type of finger-like process where it's certain even fish show this, and it's turned into fins, but it turned over, they can turn over stone and they can search for food in kelp and sea vegetable and this sort of thing. So the great shallows and things that existed, and the idea that our hominoid, the closest hominoid might be the chimp and gorillas and orangutans relative. They've got this opposable sort of thumb, and then they've got their big toes, which is a bit opposing as well. So, and using those for the task of sort of maybe climbing trees and what have you, gathering food, building shelters and this sort of thing, and foraging, of course, coming back to the raccoon. And so semi-aquatic paths which frame things more, it really includes our Wom species and the trace that we have that's hairless, and the layers of subcutaneous fat, and bipedalism, and truly, arguably, these are adaptations from an aquatic lifestyle and come under somatotyping. Okay. So under bipedalism is sort of originating a way to balance. And don't tell me that doesn't happen where the water is. It sure does when you're wading in the water. So when you're wading in the water, what are you going to be down with on your front legs as well? No, you got your front legs up. And is that which you've got hands? Well, how good is that? You could be carrying things, which we did, and we'd collect things. All right. So it certainly explains the larynx and sinus location in the larynx, where the throat is, that allows for speech. It's a function of the sinuses and all mentionedness where aquatic adaptations exist that explain our somatotyping. So aquatic explanation is perfected, really, and there's nothing that could be sweetened up better to look at the purpose of how unique our nerve is and the setupness of the originalness of, for instance, and how come chimps and others a little bit failed to evolve certain sort of features that we have with our brain, but dolphins and whales have. So an involuted pus really is probable that you've got Broca's area, which has evolved, and it really has evolved because auditory and speech suddenly has to become really way more important because you've got your head in the water, haven't you? But you could hear. So suddenly you've got listening to be so important, and not so much seeing anymore, okay, and certainly not smelling stuff because, like, you got your head in the water, that's not going to be too good. And isn't this what's happened to the whale and all the other animals that, you know, shifted back into aquatic existence? So certainly would be like you could see, well, yeah, that's right, the reduced olfactory bulb, and this explained quite a bit of a long distance more from where the nose is, where your nose is to the ground, and the bipedal species really, as opposed to quadrupedal apes. So quadrupedal sort of hominoid. And so a baby gorilla and our species, we look exactly the same. You could hardly tell the difference in the frame except for the arms. Yeah, the arms on the gorilla is huge. So other mammal where scent is high, of course, where, you know, these are hominoid it is, and not for us so much, okay? So is it because they were just more closer to branches and near the ground? And in aquatic explanation, it's very clear that water isn't going to be able to transmit scent and olfactory mucus in the membrane and those sorts of things, you see? So our ancestors spent considerable part of the time where a semi-aquatic existence it was, for sure. What would be a reason why your reduced sense of smell would have come to be where it is, and a profound control over the airway, which we do have. Yeah. And a well-developed sort of vocal apparatus that is engaged a very large brain similar to a dolphin. And so the explanation that, a species that's really intelligent as the dolphin is, that we know, and our brain is relatively similar to the dolphin. We've got refined hand movements, of course, where we are as a species. We're on the land and didn't have as much being in the water like a dolphin has had. But tool usage and grouping and organising for food and wearing things as hats, like you see dolphins actually wearing hats sometimes. So raccoon, I've got hands like we do, and it's a forager, and it does this by foraging into streams and feeling what's there. So our diving species really surrounded ever more water more, and greatly reducing the energetic cost of carrying all an extra sort of weight, and having a heavier brain. And so what's the brain's weight in relationship to the weight of the body and in relationship to gravity in its effort? It'd be extraordinary, of course, where you're looking at the dolphin in relation to our own species. So marine and shore-based sorts of diet, like our life food diet, is favourable for growing sort of and fueling the things which occurred for us, because most of those sea vegetables and seashore sort of plants, succulents, are extremely rich in tocopherols and prostaglandin and omega-3, omega-6 and omega-9. So similarities with where we are and our species. And, I guess, like when you're looking at dolphin language, it's very sophisticated, and the function of this, where their brain is also, and the syntax of their vocal learning is very complex, where their brain structure is. And ours is similar to the intelligence, in the development of dolphins. So a species really has got this sequential condition. As of course everybody knows how the dolphins have this vocalization, and we do as well. So the dolphins learn to communicate vocally, and they have a highly developed cerebral cortex, and that supports very complex cognition and memory and consciousness. And species that are really intelligent sort of have this. And so we sort of have a close representation, a little like a dolphin does on this level as well. So we're sort of paralleling perhaps the intelligence of the dolphin brain, but maybe the dolphin's brain is just off the charts ever more. But it exhibits sort of laws of brevity where they are, yes, just like us. So having language and having laws of brevity where their movement is, and it parallels the word usage, and so does our language, the same. So complex brain structures that the whales and the dolphin have, and human or our species of Wom, it's really highly developed where the cerebral cortex is, and there's brain's outer layers which are really responsible for higher levels of functioning like memory, thought, and consciousness. So it's a high degree of encephalation, of folding, in both the whales and the dolphins, and our brain also has similar sort of conditioning, increasing its surface area and cortex, allowing for greater complexity than what other primates have, for instance, in relation. So there's things that's really in the very sophisticated brain, which you can find in the dolphin, is find these spindled neuron, and they've really developed where this species, you see. And of course, when we look at ourselves, we can see that we have similar sort of mimicness. And so a dolphin's brain and where the location of all this is in both species, the spindle neuron are relatively similar as what you find in the dolphin, and concentration is very specific where brain regions is, and including the anterior cingulate cortex and frontal insular cortex. These are vital where emotional responses and blissful judgments and that sort of thing. It's just studying neurology. And so specific function where this is, it really is involving social intelligence, empathy, the ability to understand and have good feelings and intention for others. And you can see quite sophisticated conditioning where you've got the cetacean animals and the spindle neuron where their brain is, and it's linked to these conditionings. I mean, we can see that in our species, a very specific sort of a reasonness is as well, and for challenge solving in a similar way, and social cognition is similar as a dolphin. So what's found that is in our brain is found in a dolphin's brain pretty much as well. So the presence really very deep in dolphin brain and our species brain, and things of course, the semi-aquatic existence that we've had. Do you have a feeling that kind of these forces could have accelerated and caused to have to be things that come along like more for our species? So the closest to our own species and the most, you could say, well, the great apes, but then you've got elephants that contain certain amounts of spindle neuron, and semi-aquatic existence simulates this where they are, and similar to a dolphin's brain relatively. So could you imagine really that what environmental condition that's imposed, and how this, as a semi-aquatic existence, allows an adaptation where dolphins and other cetaceans exist, and including ourselves, where distinctive neocortical gyrification is in the folding and convolutions of the cerebral cortex. And so a dolphin, as we're pointing out, sort of really does surpass all the other primates, and does it because it's had aquatic existence more from the land? Yes. So the species brain that's closest, of course, is a dolphin in rankingness, where the top end is for complex social structure that we come to understand about them quite extraordinarily. And their very large brain and advanced communication capacity, just to be heading out to sea like they've been done recently, because they can sense stuff's going on around the coast. So communication in between them, they can all start herding and just rushing off all together, like they've been seen from boats. So it's really suggestive that the cognitive capacity is pretty high, and there's an uncultured sorts of pressure that cause a greater sophistication where an elephant is, for instance. And so what's really been seen to possess a very large brain and demonstrate complex social behaviour. It does include animals that give themselves a name. Yes, that's right. So species where the land is, and in an involuted past and adaptedness where semi-aquatics and full aquatics is, you could see pressures that really enable us to have really about to survive, and what an environment is where a pressure is that you have, and the nerve condition that results. Okay. So when animals really didn't have to adapt fully, like the hippo much, it was pretty easy just to remain and wallowing around a little, and its brain didn't have to be as big as what some of its cousins now are, but quite some development where the whale is and the dolphin. So chimps, of course, you really could wonder what's the smartest animal, more IQ and this sort of thing. Well, chimps certainly have a pretty high IQ. And what's unique about what's close and what's shared. Yes, within, of course, you've got the proboscis monkey, and they really have developed vocalization and language and communication that's without sight, and they have their nose, and they grow a bigger nose because it's more nasal, and they can use sound more as a chamber there. And the communication with the coastal others where the mangrove forest environment is. And you can see their nose has grown to be able to shed water, but also, very importantly, they've developed quite auditory conditioning amongst themselves. So the trees are there, of course, but then kind of they're swimming a lot where the mangrove swamps are. So it's because really the complexity that's existed, and you've got a bonobo, which as another primate really is well known for frequent face-to-face or ventroventral sort of intimacy with each other, whereas the other animals sort of mount from behind and don't do that ventroventral. But you've got the things where that species, you've got very similar to our own, you've got a variety of social sort of purpose and things going on, so people could look at each other. So it's really beyond just reproduction and including sort of social bondedness, but just not just one thing that's been engaged, but multiplicity of things to have capacity, to have adapted, and have been able to go beyond any prefix set pattern, to have been able to survive, and that's intelligence. Okay. So whatever pressure that would be where the environment conditioning is, where our story is today in our podcast, it really is a species that we could be looking at, like the bonobo monkey and a dolphin and the species that's observed. And there's very few that just have non-stop sex, for instance, just for pleasure. But there you go. The bonobo also does, and so does the dolphin. So if we look around, of course, we could catch this story for sure. Anyway, I think that it's a great synopsis a little of the topic a little bit, and could you be cared to learn a little more about this topic itself? Anyway, I really hope that this really sparks your whole curiosity and everything, and you tune into ever more podcasts that we have coming up with some really great topics. Yes? So anyway, love you guys, love you, Lukey, and look forward to catching up to you guys in a future show. Love you.